if they feel, and I'm one of them also, that if we feel that we've been left out of the process, then the process might take over the substantive part of what we're trying to do. So I agree with the congressman from Massachusetts, and I understand what he's saying, and it's something that he's right, that we've asked the administration, and I personally told the administration, the ambassador over and over, I said, you got to include members, because once you make the presentation, they're going to be left out, and you might get a pushback, maybe not on the substance, but maybe more on the process itself. So, thank you.
Reclaiming my time, I obviously it's a day late for the administration, but I know that I will be soliciting the views of the gentleman from Texas and others who I know have, by dint of their proximity to Mexico, have a knowledge about what is transpiring on the border and have relationships with our friends from Mexico. And I think it's very positive that the relationship between the Mexican government and the administration in terms of this area seems to be heading in the right direction. But if there's a problem here, it's the administration's approach. I yield back.
I thank Congressman Delahunt, or because of no mas, should I say, Congressman Roberto Duran. But those are always catchy statements. I want to. I heard Mr. Delahunt and Mr. Cuellar, and I certainly agree with everything that they are both saying about the process here. And I want to thank Mr. Siris for opening the hearing for me. As my vice chair, I was on the floor of the House debating the SCHIP, Children's Health Insurance bill. My other committee, Energy and Commerce, I'm on the Health Subcommittee, and I was debating that bill, so I do apologize. And I want to welcome everybody to today's hearing on U.S. security assistance to Mexico. As we all know, and has been said, on Monday, the Bush administration asked Congress to approve $1.4 billion over the next 3 years to help the Mexican government fight drug traffickers. The President has asked for the quick appropriation of $500 million for Mexico and an additional $50 million for Central America. I certainly look forward to renewing the proposal, and I think that the proposal is probably, by and large, a good one. But let me be clear from the start, as my colleagues have said, and I said this, and it was my comments were in a number of the papers, newspapers, the past couple of days. Congress was in no way consulted as this counter-narcotics package was developed. It's obviously not a good way to kick off such an important bilateral effort to combat drug trafficking and drug-related violence in Mexico. I have just spoken to Congressman Reyes, also from Texas, who is the chairman of the Intelligence Subcommittee and goes down to Mexico frequently with interparliamentary dialogue between Mexican and U.S. legislators. Mr. Reyes, besides being the distinguished chairman of our Intelligence Committee, is also a Mexican-American and lives on the border in El Paso, Texas. And so this is something that's very, very important to him. And he expressed the same kind of frustration to me that he was not consulted at all as well. So in a way, misery loves company. I had assumed that perhaps they would consult with him, but I guess the administration didn't see fit to consult with any members of Congress. Sometimes I think we're just a mere annoyance for them, and frankly, it's really very annoying from our point of view. Since my colleagues and I had no opportunity to be briefed on this aid package before it was released, we'll obviously have to carefully comb over every detail of the President's request in the coming weeks and months. The U.S. interagency counter-narcotics community estimates that 90% of the cocaine that went from South America to the U.S. transited through Mexico in 2004 and 2005. And drug-related violence has left more than 4,000 Mexicans dead in the last 2 years. No one can deny the severity of this problem. Something obviously needs to be done, and as a country that consumes most of the drugs coming from Mexico, unfortunately, the U.S. has a moral responsibility to play a constructive role. But in considering foreign assistance to Mexico, we must first think carefully about our goals. Is our goal to curb the amount of drugs entering the U.S., or is it to help Mexico and communities on the U.S.-Mexican border to improve their security? I believe both are noble goals, but if our goal is to curb drugs entering the U.S., I hope we have learned by now that supply-side drug reduction strategies, when executed alone, are not enough. Mexico increased its transit capacity when the major drug cartels in Medellin and Cali, Colombia, shut down. The closure of cocaine trafficking routes through Florida also pushed greater drug flows to Mexico. We should not be so naive as to think that the defeat of Mexico's drug cartels alone will significantly reduce drug consumption in the U.S. Drug traffickers can easily pick up once again and move on to new routes. Even if we're successful in Mexico and Central America, experience tells us that this will not end drug production or trafficking. It will merely go elsewhere. A more logical place seems to be the Caribbean. Will the Merida Initiative merely steer the drug flows to the Caribbean, and particularly to Haiti, the poorest country in the hemisphere, with the smallest capacity to handle the problem? Colombia can serve as a helpful example. I just returned from Colombia. I believe that Plan Colombia had a major impact in reducing homicides, kidnappings, and massacres in Colombia. I just returned from Colombia, where I saw the impressive results of President Alvaro Uribe's efforts to reduce violence throughout his country. But if we are to judge Plan Colombia on its originally intended purpose, to curb the illegal flow of drugs into the U.S., it would not receive very high marks. If we're very serious about reducing the amount of drugs on the streets and in the hands of our nation's children, then I believe we must develop as well a nationwide drug demand reduction strategy to complement our efforts on the supply side. I was pleased that the joint U.S.-Mexico statement on our security cooperation efforts noted that the U.S. will intensify its efforts to address all aspects of drug trafficking, including demand-related portions. That's a quote. My staff saw the foreign assistance portion of the plan yesterday and asked what additional steps were proposed for demand reduction, but they did not receive a clear answer. I want to know from the administration how they intend to meet this commitment to intensify demand reduction efforts in the U.S. In addition to reducing the demand for drugs here at home, one of the most important things we can do to help our neighbor to the south is to stop the flow of arms from the U.S. into Mexico. Mexican authorities estimate that more than 90% of the weapons that they confiscate were originally purchased in the U.S. While U.S.-Mexican cooperation on arms sales have improved, gun laws in border states like Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas are very, very lax, and they do not limit the amount of handguns and assault weapons one can purchase and make it easy for weapons to flow south of our border as a result. The State Department tells us that the U.S. has signed and is in compliance with the Inter-American Convention Against Arms Trafficking. I would like to know if that is true, and if so, why the Senate has not ratified the treaty. Let me say now that I do believe it is critical for the U.S. to assist Mexico in combating its drug cartels, which are responsible for far too much violence in Mexico and along the U.S.-Mexican border. As Maureen Meyer from the Washington Office on Latin America recently reported, the most alarming characteristic in the surge of drug-related violence in Mexico is not the sheer numbers of killings, but the brutal tactics adopted by drug traffickers. In recent years, this has included torture, execution, and burning of rivals, severed heads being set on stakes in front of public buildings, and in one instance being rolled across a dance floor in a nightclub. I am also concerned about the harsh impact that drug violence has had on journalists in Mexico. Because of the risks associated with reporting on narco-trafficking, Mexico was recently ranked as the second most dangerous country in the world for journalists, only after Iraq. For instance, I'm aware of the killing of Brad Will, a U.S. journalist and documentary filmmaker who was shot on October 27, 2006 in Mexico. I would like an update from U.S. and Mexican authorities on the investigation into his death. I am pleased that our counter-narcotics program for Mexico includes technical and anti-corruption assistance for the justice system and vetting of Mexico's police. In the past, fear of corrupt Mexico security personnel has impeded cooperation between our countries. In that vein, I hope that we do not simply provide short-term assistance for a few elite police or military units. There are 24,000 federal police and over 425,000 state and local law enforcement officers in Mexico. Any police professionalization or anti-corruption training must be widespread. I believe that sincerely, and the focus should be on long-term improvement of their entire police force. I would be remiss not to discuss the $50 million in assistance requested for Central America. This subcommittee has focused intensively on violence in Central America, and I am pleased to see that Central America is included in the President's request. I am also pleased to have learned that the assistance